Adrian Cross was once hailed as the titan of technology, a man whose mind could bend the digital world to his will, to the outside world. He was untouchable, a billionaire genius standing at the peak of innovation, yet inside the glittering fortress of his company, his empire was unraveling thread by thread. The very foundation of his legacy was threatened by a ghostly flaw, an elusive bug hidden deep within the code of his most ambitious creation. The project, codenamed Odyssey, was designed to change the world of commerce forever. Powered by artificial intelligence, it promised to reshape global logistics, to move goods across oceans and skies with the speed and precision of thought itself. Investors called it revolutionary. Journalists declared it the invention of the decade. Adrian called it his life's work, the crown jewel that would carry his company, Nexus Dynamics, into eternity. But the program was broken, a memory leak insidious, unpredictable, and devastating haunted every line of code like a phantom. No matter how his elite engineers attacked it, the system collapsed without mercy. 3 weeks had passed. 3 weeks of endless patches, sleepless nights, and failure after humiliating failure. The bug was merciless, crashing entire simulations after hours or even days of apparent stability. His engineers, hand-picked prodigies from the most prestigious universities, had burned themselves down to shadows, their brilliance dimmed by frustration. Still, the fatal word scrolled endlessly across the holographic screens of Nexus's war rooms. Fatal error, memory allocation failure. Vidian Global, their most powerful client, had lost patience. Their ultimatum was merciless. Fix the issue within 72 hours or face a lawsuit so vast it would shatter Nexus Dynamics beyond repair. Billions of dollars, years of reputation, and the livelihoods of thousands hung by a thread. Competitors circled like sharks, hungry for blood, and Adrian, the man who had once built wonders out of nothing but raw determination, now sat caged inside the glass walls of his corner office, suffocating under the weight of inevitability. The San Francisco night wrapped the city in its cold fog, pressing against the 50-story tower like an accusing hand. From his panoramic windows, Adrian gazed out at the blurred glitter of lights below. To the world, this view symbolized triumph. Tonight it felt like a gilded prison. The empire he had built mocking him from the very skyline it had helped shape dotted. The silence, the hum of machines, and the endless flicker of red text became unbearable. He had dismissed his team hours ago, his voice hoarse with fury as he ordered them out of his sight. Their defeated faces lingered in his memory like a curse. For the first time in decades, Adrian Cross felt powerless. He pulled on his tailored coat, its luxury absurd against his frayed nerves, and left his private elevator behind. He needed anonymity, contact with the world outside his tower, if only for a moment. On the street, the damp air struck his face like cold water. He waved off his driver and began to walk aimlessly, a ghost among his own creations of glass and steel. Block after block passed, until he found himself standing before a restaurant he barely remembered existed. The Gilded Spoon, a relic from another era, warm, wooden, lit with soft golden light, it promised solitude, a reprieve from the digital inferno consuming him. He pushed open the heavy door, and the quiet murmur of conversation and the gentle clatter of silverware wrapped around him like a balm. The host led him to a secluded booth. He ordered food he had no appetite for, and a glass of Macallan he knew he would drain. As the scotch burned through his chest, he watched the restaurant's staff glide between tables, moving with practiced rhythm. It was, in its own way, a flawless system, human machinery polished by repetition and necessity. One waitress caught his eye, young, perhaps mid-20s, with sharp, observant eyes that missed nothing. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe ponytail, her name tag reading Leela. There was a quiet intelligence in her posture, a coiled energy barely contained beneath the routine of her job. She moved with quiet competence, her polite smile masking something deeper. Adrian found himself studying her without realizing it, her presence an uninvited distraction from the weight of his failure. Minutes turned to a half hour. She vanished through the swinging doors into the kitchen, and curiosity tugged at him with surprising force. When he finally rose to head toward the restroom, his path took him past those doors. They swung open just long enough for him to glimpse something that stopped him dead in his tracks. In a cramped corner of the bustling kitchen, half hidden by sacks of flour, Leela sat hunched over a battered old laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated her face in stark contrast to the clattering chaos around her. Her hands flew across the keyboard with blistering speed, her fingers a blur. Adrian knew that rhythm. He had lived it. It was not the idle typing of a student or the fumbling notes of an amateur. It was the cadence of a creator. And then he saw it. The screen was filled with code, real, intricate, professional code, not just any code, threads, memory calls, logic structure so uncannily familiar that his breath caught in his throat. She was writing solutions to problems he had been drowning in for weeks, impossible, absurd, and yet it was happening right before his eyes. The noise of the kitchen faded to a dull roar. He forgot the restroom, forgot his untouched meal, forgot even the scotch still on his table. All that existed was this young woman, this waitress, weaving digital spells on a decade-old machine while the scent of garlic and grease swirled around her. Adrian Cross, the Titan brought to his knees by an invisible ghost in the machine, stood, frozen, for the first time in weeks. Something stirred inside him, something dangerous, desperate, and alive, hope. Adrian lingered in the narrow hallway outside the kitchen, his hand still resting on the doorframe as though it anchored him to reality. Every logical instinct screamed that what he had seen was a coincidence, an illusion conjured by exhaustion and too much whiskey. But the code on her screen was burned into his mind with the clarity of lightning, an elegant threading protocol, precise and intricate, like something his own engineers had been chasing without success. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with a heavy blend of roasted meat, garlic, and disinfectant. His pulse hammered in his ears. For 3 weeks, Nexus Dynamics had been drowning in failure. For 3 weeks, he had carried the weight of impending ruin on his back, and here, in the unlikeliest corner of the city, a waitress might have just handed him a lifeline. Desperation gave him courage. He pushed through the swinging door and entered the chaos of the kitchen. The heat struck him instantly. Boiling pots hissed, pans clattered. Chefs shouted orders over the roar of flames and knives. A burly cook shot him a glare. "Sir, customers aren't allowed back here." Adrian ignored him. His gaze was locked on Leela. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her brow was furrowed, her teeth catching her lower lip in concentration, fingers flying across her battered keyboard. The lines of code scrolling across her dimly lit screen looked eerily similar to the cursed core of Odyssey. "Excuse me," Adrian said, his voice quieter than he expected. Though it cut through the noise like glass, Lila's head snapped up. Her eyes widened, first with shock, then with the sudden panic of someone caught in a forbidden act. In a heartbeat, she snapped her laptop shut and straightened. Her mask of professionalism slid seamlessly back into place. "You can't be back here," she said quickly, her tone clipped but polite. "If there's an issue with your order, I can have it fixed immediately." Adrian's eyes flicked down to the closed laptop. "The issue," he said slowly, his words deliberate, "isn't with my meal. It's with a recursive memory leak in a multi-threaded logistics platform." Her face drained of color. The words landed like a thunderclap. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't feign confusion. Her reaction was immediate unguarded recognition. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice sharp and wary. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his tone so only she could hear. "My name is Adrian Cross." He saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. Everyone in the tech world knew that name. She glanced from his tailored coat to his face, piecing it together. Her lips moved soundlessly before she spoke the words like a diagnosis. "Nexus Dynamics, Odyssey." It wasn't a question, Adrian said, studying her expression. "You've heard of it." Leela swallowed, her hands tightening on the edges of her laptop as though it were a lifeline. "I follow public dev logs, pre-release updates. It's hard to miss something that big." She hesitated, then added in a low voice, "And yes, you're in trouble. The launch is supposed to be next quarter. The launch will be canceled and Nexus will be gutted if we don't fix the bug." Adrian admitted bluntly, "A bug my entire division of engineers can't find." Her breath hitched. The hum of the kitchen seemed to press closer around them, but for Adrian, the world had narrowed to her and the closed laptop between them. "What were you working on just now?" he asked. "A personal project," she replied quickly, her eyes darting toward the head chef, who was glaring at them with increasing suspicion. "Don't lie to me," Adrian said, his voice steady, but edged with an intensity that made her flinch. "I saw your screen. The threading protocol you were implementing, a predictive resource allocation manager." Her knuckles whitened against the laptop. Silence stretched before she finally exhaled, her voice barely audible. You're not wrong. Adrian's pulse quickened. He leaned closer. Then look at ours. She blinked. What? I want you to look at Odyssey's code, he said. The words reckless and unstoppable once they left his mouth. All of it. She stared at him as though he had lost his mind. I'm a waitress, she said, her voice trembling. 5 minutes ago, I was bringing you a drink. Now you want me to what? Walk into your billion-dollar company and fix what? Your army of engineers can't. I'll pay you for your time, Adrian said firmly. Name your price. I'll sign any contract, any NDA you want. Just look at it. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, searching for an escape. Fear warred with something else in her gaze, a flicker of longing, the spark of hunger. She shook her head. Why me? You have the best engineers in the world. The best engineers in the world have failed for 3 weeks. Adrian shot back. They're trapped inside their own thinking. You're not in that box. You have nothing to lose. And frankly, neither do I, she hesitated. I dropped out, she confessed suddenly, the words tumbling out as though dragged from her against her will. Caltech, 2 years. My mother got sick. I've been working here ever since. I don't have a degree. I just code for myself. The admission hung in the hot kitchen air. To Adrian, it wasn't a deterrent. It was a revelation, untapped brilliance derailed by circumstance. I don't care about your degree, he said, his voice firm, almost fierce. A piece of paper says you can learn. What I saw on that screen says you can do. And that's what matters. Leela stared at him, her defenses faltering. The Odyssey platform is bleeding memory because of phantom allocations, Adrian pressed on. Somewhere in the recursive logic, resources are being orphaned. We can't trace it. Does that sound like a problem you'd find interesting? Her expression shifted. The fear dimmed, replaced by the sharp, focused look he had glimpsed when she was coding. Her lips moved unconsciously, murmuring, it could be in the threads themselves. If a parent process dies before the children are joined, memory gets stranded. Adrian felt the hairs on his arms rise. She had leapt to the same theory his team had dismissed. Not in hours instantly. He pulled a sleek black business card from his wallet and set it gently on top of her laptop. Nexus Tower. Tomorrow morning. Ask for me. Security will clear you. Name your price, Leela. Whatever it is. I'll pay it. She stared at the card, her hand trembling as though it were a ticket to another universe. My table. She began automatically, her waitress persona rushing back to the surface. Forget the table, Adrian said, already turning toward the door. He paused and glanced back at her. Her eyes were locked on the silver embossed card as though it glowed. Tomorrow morning, he said. Don't make me regret this. And then he was gone, swallowed back into the hushed dining room. His pulse pounding with adrenaline. It was the most reckless, unprofessional move of his career. Either he had just saved his company or doomed it. For the first time in weeks, Adrian Cross wasn't sure which. The morning sun had only just broken through the haze when Leela Morgan stood outside the soaring glass walls of Nexus Dynamics Tower. The building loomed like a monument to ambition, its mirrored facade reflecting the restless city beneath it. The air hummed with the kind of pressure, the kind that made her feel impossibly small. She clutched the strap of her worn backpack as though it were armor. The card Adrian Cross had given her the night before was hidden in its front pocket, its silver embossed letters gleaming like a dare. For hours she had debated whether to come. The rational voice in her head screamed that she was a fool. She was a waitress, not a consultant. She had no credentials, no portfolio, nothing but the scraps of code written on an old laptop between shifts. And yet there she was. The marble floor of the lobby gleamed beneath her shoes. As she stepped inside, the space was cathedral-like, a cavern of brushed steel and cascading water, designed to intimidate. Sleek professionals in tailored suits hurried past her, their faces illuminated by the glow of devices, each moving with relentless purpose. Leela felt like an imposter who had accidentally wandered into a temple where she didn't belong. She approached the reception desk, her voice nearly swallowed by nerves. I am here to see Adrian Cross. My name is Leela Morgan, the receptionist. A man with perfect posture and sharper hair typed her name. His eyes flicked up with faint surprise. Of course, Ms. Morgan, Mr. Cross is expecting you. 5th floor. A restricted access elevator chimed open as though it had been waiting for her. The ride upward felt endless. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished steel walls, black blouse, slacks, shoes scuffed at the edges. Everyone else in the tower wore their confidence like armor. She wore doubt. When the doors opened, Adrian Cross was waiting. He looked different here than he had in the dim restaurant light. In his tower, in his domain, the weariness of the previous night had burned away. He radiated command, every step carrying the authority of a man who ruled entire industries. "Leela," he said, his voice brisk but not unkind. "I'm glad you came. Let's not waste time." He led her through a maze of glass-walled offices and buzzing open-plan workspaces. Heads turned as they passed. Whispers rose in their wake. Who was this woman in plain clothes walking beside? Adrian Cross himself. Lila's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to keep her chin level. They entered a vast conference room where a dozen exhausted engineers hunched over laptops and half-empty coffee cups. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. At the head of the table sat a man in his late 30s, sharp suit, sharper smile, and eyes that measured everyone around him, like opponents on a chessboard. His nameplate read, Victor Hale, lead software architect. Adrian's voice carried like a hammer on stone. "Everyone, this is Leela Morgan. She'll be consulting on Odyssey. Give her full access to the code base, server logs, everything. She reports directly to me." A stunned silence followed. The engineers exchanged glances, confusion and skepticism flickering in their eyes. Victor Hale leaned back in his chair, his pen tapping slowly against the polished table. "A consultant," he said at last, his tone silken with condescension. His gaze swept over Leela like a scalpel. "May I ask which firm you represent, Ms. Morgan? Or perhaps which doctoral program we've had the honor of borrowing you from?" The words were a test of blade disguised as a question. The other engineers watched, waiting for her to stumble. Before Leela could reply, Adrian's voice cut like ice. "Her credentials," he said, his tone broking no argument, "are that she has my confidence. That is all you need to know." Victor's smirk faltered, but his eyes hardened. "As you wish," he said smoothly. Then, to a junior engineer, "Ethan, set her up with the terminal." Ethan Ward, a weary young man with hollow eyes and jittering hands, hurried to obey. He led Leela to a small desk tucked away in the corner, clearly meant for temporary use. As he configured her access, he whispered, "Don't mind Hale. He's been leading this project for 2 years. He thinks Odyssey belongs to him." Lila's gaze flicked to Victor, who was still watching her with thinly veiled disdain. "And it's a sick child," she muttered under her breath. When her terminal lit up, the screen filled with Odyssey's sprawling source code. Millions of lines stretched before her like the architecture of a vast digital city. Leila leaned closer, her nerves momentarily forgotten. The engineers had been focused on Odyssey's AI core, convinced the memory leak lay within its complex predictive models. But Lila's instincts guided her elsewhere. She combed through the unglamorous foundations, the plumbing of the system, thread management, resource allocation. The parts most likely overlooked dot patterns emerged, tiny discrepancies in timestamps, milliseconds of delay where none should exist. They were almost invisible, but they set her pulse racing. She needed deeper access. The standard logs weren't enough. She found Ethan again. "I need kernel-level logs for the primary simulation servers," she said firmly. Ethan paled. "I can't grant that. Only Victor can." Her jaw tightened. She approached Victor's desk. He was on the phone, speaking loudly, laughing at something unseen. When he finally turned, she met his gaze without flinching. "I need kernel access," she said. Victor scoffed. "Absolutely not. We don't give consultants root access to our most secure servers. Do you have any idea what proprietary data you could compromise?" "I'm tracing a memory allocation flaw," she replied evenly. "The standard logs aren't granular enough. There's a discrepancy below what they capture." "A discrepancy?" Victor repeated, his voice dripping with derision. "Ms. Morgan, my team has spent years building this system. We've run every diagnostic imaginable. If there were a discrepancy, we would have found it. Why don't you return to your desk and consult?" His smirk was a dismissal, a wall he didn't expect her to breach. Frustrated, Leila returned to her terminal. If she couldn't go deeper, she would go wider. She began writing a custom diagnostic, her own tool, her own lens into Odyssey's hidden shadows. She called it Cerberus. A hound to hunt the ghost in the machine. Hours passed. The room emptied as the weary engineers drifted away. Only Victor left with a smug, satisfied look cast in her direction. As if her continued struggle proved her futility, Leila ignored him. She wasn't there for his approval. She was there for the truth. The glow of the screen bathed her face as she worked through the night, her desk littered with coffee cups and scribbled notes. And somewhere behind the glass walls of his office, Adrian Cross watched silently, his lights burning just as late. The next 2 days blurred into a sleepless marathon. Time lost its shape inside the fluorescent-lit hive of Nexus Dynamics. Layla Morgan lived in front of her terminal, sustained by caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer willpower. Her temporary desk became a battlefield of empty coffee cups, scribbled diagrams on napkins, and hastily unwrapped protein bars. The engineers treated her as an oddity. Some watched her with skepticism, others with quiet curiosity, but none offered help. She was a stranger in their fortress of logic, an uninvited guest in a house of egos. Only Ethan Ward occasionally drifted by, leaving a sandwich or murmuring encouragement before retreating under Victor Hale's withering gaze. Victor himself hardly acknowledged her presence, except for the occasional smirk that suggested he expected her to fail spectacularly. He had dismissed her as a nuisance, a distraction Adrian Cross would tire of once she hit the same dead end as everyone else. But Leela wasn't walking the same path as everyone else. Her diagnostic tool, Cerberus, became her ally. Unlike the polished suites the engineers relied on, Cerberus was raw, adaptive, personal. It didn't search for patterns in the polished AI models or high-level predictions. Instead, it crawled into the system's foundations, tracing every thread Odyssey spawned, recording each allocation and release with relentless precision. Hours of logs filled her screen. At first, it was noise, numbers, timestamps, memory blocks too vast to comprehend. But slowly, through the static, a pattern emerged. The memory leak wasn't constant. It didn't grow like a steady tide. It spiked, violent and unpredictable. During very specific simulations, short-distance, high-volume deliveries, that was the key. The team had focused on massive international shipping, where cargo moved along steady routes. But Odyssey choked when asked to simulate thousands of tiny, rapid delivery citywide drones, short-haul trucks, instant logistics at scale. The churn overwhelmed it. Her theory from that night in the kitchen returned with force, orphaned threads, processes that lived and died quickly, slipping past the system's cleanup routines. She pushed deeper. Cerberus revealed the truth piece by piece. Odyssey's thread management relied on a low-level library written years ago, long before Odyssey's ambitious scale existed. The library assigned handler threads for each new route, while a cleanup process periodically reaped the dead. But the cleanup had a fatal flaw. If it couldn't lock onto a thread in time, because the thread was still initializing or dying too quickly, it skipped it. In small numbers, that didn't matter. But at Odyssey's scale, with thousands of short-lived threads per minute, statistical certainty took over. A fraction of threads always slipped through. Their memory was never reclaimed. They became ghosts. Thousands upon thousands of tiny, forgotten fragments that slowly drowned the system until it collapsed. Layla leaned back, exhaustion flooding her body, but her mind burned electric. She had found it, and the fix, just as simple, 3 lines of code. Change the cleanup routine to rate check busy threads instead of skipping them. That was all. A 3-line solution to a billion-dollar catastrophe. Her hands trembled as she modified Cerberus to log every skipped thread. She ran the simulation again. The logs erupted proof. Undeniable, irrefutable. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't guessing. She had slain the ghost in the machine. She saved her files in a secure folder. On the server, Odyssey_solution_LM. Her initials. Her moment. It was past 3 in the morning. Her body ached. Her vision blurred. But she allowed herself a fleeting smile. She would show Adrian at first light. She would finally prove that brilliance wasn't confined to titles or resumes. But she wasn't alone. Across the room, Victor Hale sat at his own terminal, eyes shadowed with something darker than fatigue. Hours earlier, he had approached Lila's desk under the pretense of assisting Ethan with a server issue. While leaning over her terminal, he had quietly installed a keystroke logger and a screen-sharing utility. It was a violation so blatant, it would have ended his career if discovered. But Victor had justified it as vigilance. After all, what security risk was greater than a waitress given access to their crown jewel? From his home office, he had watched her every keystroke. He had seen her trace the churn. He had watched her narrow in on the old library, had felt the icy dread when her Cerberus script illuminated the very bug. That had haunted them for weeks, and then he had seen her solution, elegant, devastatingly simple, for Victor, dread-twisted, into something colder. Ambition. She had found it, yes, but she hadn't reported it yet. She had no proof beyond a folder hidden on the server, and he was the lead architect, the man whose name was already tied to Odyssey. Who would the board believe, the waitress or him? He replicated her work feverishly, copied her 3-line fix, altered variable names just enough to disguise it, and wrote his own explanation. His version looked clean, authoritative, inevitable. He created his own folder, his own so-called solution. Then, with one last malicious flourish, he accessed the server with his administrative privileges. He found her folder, Odyssey_solution_LM, and deleted it. Wiped the logs that showed she had ever saved it, erased her proof as though it had never existed. The ghost was gone. At 7 in the morning, as Leela dozed on a wellness room sofa, her body too drained to stand, Victor Hale sent an email to Adrian Cross and the executive board. Subject: urgent Odyssey stability issue resolved. The message was concise, triumphant. After a final deep dive led by himself, his team had identified and resolved the critical memory flaw. The solution was ready for implementation. Victor leaned back, a thin smile spreading across his face. In a matter of hours, he would be celebrated as the savior of Odyssey. And Leela Morgan, unaware, slept a few floors below, believing her discovery still lived safely on the server. The 50th floor boardroom was buzzing with relief. Engineers and executives gathered around a long-polished table, voices animated, faces alight with triumph. The atmosphere was worlds away from the tension of the past 3 weeks. Laughter replaced silence. Hope replaced despair. At the center of it all sat Victor Hale, shoulders squared, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile polished to perfection. He accepted congratulations with the air of a general returning victorious from war. To anyone walking into the room, he was the man who had saved Odyssey. Adrian Cross stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He allowed himself a moment of visible relief. After all, the email Victor had sent before dawn promised salvation. But beneath the mask, something gnawed at him. The sudden breakthrough, so neat, so perfectly timed, scratched against his instincts. The doors opened, and Leela Morgan stepped into the boardroom clutching her tablet. Her heart raced. But she stood tall, determined. She had rehearsed her words all morning, eager to explain the elegant simplicity of her solution. This was her moment, the culmination of every sleepless hour, every whispered doubt silenced. But what she walked into was not anticipation, it was celebration. Victor was already projecting the solution onto the main screen. With smooth confidence, he explained how his team had re-examined foundational thread handling protocols and uncovered a subtle race condition. He showed the 3-line fix, his altered version of her work, and described the problem exactly as she had, word for word. Leela froze, her breath caught in her chest, her grip on the tablet tightening until her knuckles turned white. He was using her discovery, every insight, every detail, and passing it off as his own. The board members nodded in approval. Gerald Knox, one of the senior executives, clapped Victor on the back. Brilliant work, Victor. You've saved the company. Victor gave a modest shrug. It was a team effort, he said magnanimously, though the gleam in his eyes betrayed him. Leela's world tilted. She felt sick, betrayed. Her proof, her folder gone. Panic rose like a tide. She had saved everything. She was sure of it. But Victor was standing here, claiming it, and everyone believed him. Adrian turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Excellent work, he said to Victor. Then he looked at Leela, acknowledging her presence with a nod. And thank you, Leela. Your input clearly helped direct the team's focus. It felt like a knife. He thought she had merely nudged them in the right direction. He believed Victor had delivered the solution. No, she blurted, her voice trembling. Every head turned toward her. That's my solution. He stole it. A ripple of shock moved through the room. Victor chuckled softly, a sound full of pity. Ms. Morgan, I understand the stress of this project may have made you feel invested. But this is my team's work. The commit logs will show that. The other engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Leela's face flushed, but she refused to back down. I found it last night at 3 in the morning. I wrote a diagnostic script. Cherber Stew trace skipped threads. It led me straight to the bug. Victor leaned forward, His smirk cruel. A script? How quaint. We have entire diagnostic suites, developed over years, hardly comparable to an amateur's tool cobbled together in the middle of the night. Amateur or not, it worked. Leela shot back, her voice rising. The cleanup routine skipped threads that died quickly, thousands of orphans. That's what was causing the leak. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. She looked at Adrian, her eyes pleading for him to see the truth. But all she saw in his face was conflict, relief at the fix, but also a seed of doubt. Let's not lose focus, Adrian said at last, his voice neutral. The important thing is that Odyssey is stable. The patch works. Vidian Global can be notified. His words landed like a gavel. The meeting resumed, the board members already discussing deployment plans. Victor basked in the glow of triumph. Leela stood in silence, her voice drowned out by the celebration. To them, she was nothing but a strange young woman who had sat at a corner desk for 2 days, now trying to claim credit she couldn't prove. The injustice pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. Her discovery had been stolen, her proof erased, and Adrian, the man who had brought her here, had dismissed her with polite gratitude. She turned and walked out of the boardroom, her legs heavy, the sound of their laughter fading behind her, like a cruel echo. But Adrian Cross was not a man who built empires by ignoring instincts, and something about Victor Hale's triumph scratched at the edges of his mind. Lila's words replayed in his memory. Cerberus, orphan threads, 3 a.m. The details were too sharp, too specific, too real. Victor's victory was too convenient. And Adrian Cross, coder at heart, would never accept convenience without proof. The celebration roared on behind closed doors, but Adrian Cross left it all behind. He retreated to his private office, sealing the heavy glass doors with a quiet hiss. For the first time in days, he was alone. He sank into his chair, but his hands didn't rest. He pulled up a secure terminal on his personal machine, bypassing the layers of bureaucracy that usually kept executives far from the guts of their systems. He wasn't just the CEO of Nexus Dynamics. He was still, at his core, a coder. He knew how to dig deeper than his engineers suspected. Leela Morgan's words haunted him. Cerberus, 3 a.m, orphan threads. She hadn't sounded like someone grasping for stolen glory. She had spoken with the conviction of discovery, the kind born of sleepless obsession and undeniable proof. Victor Hale, on the other hand, had presented to Neely, to suddenly, a miracle solution delivered hours after Leela had been given access. It didn't add up. Adrian began his search. First, he combed the server for any trace of Cerberus. Nothing. If Leela had written it, it must have lived on her local terminal. Then he searched for the folder she had named Odyssey_solution_on. Again, nothing. But nothing was never truly nothing. On high-security servers, deletion wasn't immediate. It was marking for overwrite. Adrian initiated a low-level sector scan, the kind that could resurrect the ghosts of erased files. While it ran, he pulled up the administrative logs. Victor was right about one thing. The commit logs showed him making the final code change. At 7 a.m. clean. To clean, Adrian widened the net. He searched not just file access, but every command executed by users with administrative privileges in the last 12 hours. And there it was, buried in lines of text most executives would never dare to parse. 3:47 a.m. RM, RF, secure. Projects, Odyssey, solution_moan command. A forceful, irreversible delete. A minute later, another command. A manual purge of the access logs for that specific directory. Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. It was the digital equivalent of a burglar wiping down a crime scene with bleach but leaving behind a receipt for the bleach itself. Victor Hale had tried to erase the evidence, but his arrogance had betrayed him. The sector scan completed. Fragments of Lila's folder flickered back into existence, pieced together, like bones from ashes. Adrian opened them one by one. CE or BE or US.log. Timestamps glowing with skipped threads. Solution.txt, a concise explanation of the flaw. Pass.diff, 3 lines of code, beautifully commented, her initials marked in the corner. He sat back, staring at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. Leela Morgan had found the ghost in the machine. Victor Hale had stolen her work and tried to bury the proof. Adrian's chest tightened with anger, not just at Victor's betrayal, but at his own near complicity. He had almost believed him. He had almost dismissed Leela as a foolish imposter. But not anymore. He picked up the phone, his voice steady but charged. "Gerald Knox, call the board back into the room. Now, the celebration is over." When Adrian returned to the boardroom, the atmosphere was still buoyant. Executives and engineers chatted, riding the high of salvation. Victor Hale strode in with the confidence of a man already savoring the next rung of his career. His eyes gleamed with smug triumph as he took his seat. Adrian didn't sit. He remained standing at the head of the room, posture rigid, expression carved from stone. His silence cut through the chatter, and the room fell still. "Our celebration," he began, his voice calm, but carrying an iron weight, was premature. Confusion rippled across the room. Victor's smile faltered, just slightly. "We have indeed found the solution to Odyssey's failure," Adrian continued. "But the wrong person has been credited, and the truth reveals a rot inside this company. Far more dangerous than any bug in our code." The silence deepened, heavy with unease. Adrian's eyes locked on Victor. "Victor Hale, you told us you identified the flaw after a deep dive with your team. Is that correct?" Victor leaned back, feigning composure. "Yes, a subtle race condition, complex, but we caught it." Adrian took a slow step forward, his voice laced with quiet sarcasm. "Fascinating. Because the solution was documented and finalized at 3:32 a.m. not by you, not by your team, but by Leila Morgan." Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Victor's smirk vanished. With a press of a button, Adrian lit up the main screen. A recovered folder appeared, Odyssey_solution_LM. Inside were the files, intact and undeniable. Code, explanation, logs all time-stamped hours before Victor's supposed breakthrough. Lila's work filled the room, her truth undeniable in glowing letters across the wall. Victor's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came, and Adrian crossed, with the fury of a man defending not just his company, but its very soul, prepared to deliver the final blow. The boardroom was a tomb of silence, every eye fixed on the screen where Leila Morgan's files glowed in damning clarity. The neatly commented code, the precise explanation. The Cerberus log with its relentless timestamps. They told a story. The clean to deny. Victor Hale sat frozen, his polished composure cracking. His pen slipped from his fingers, clattering against the table. "This is absurd," he stammered, his voice thinner than it had ever sounded, fabricated. "She must have somehow piggybacked on my work." Adrian Cross didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority carried in the quiet, measured cadence of his words. "Is that so? Then perhaps you can explain this." With another tap, the display shifted. Lines of server command logs filled the screen, one entry highlighted in blood-red text. 347, a.m, rm, rf, secure, projects, Odyssey, solution_Lamadrian's voice was cold steel. For those unfamiliar with the command, that is a forceful, permanent deletion of a directory, and the account that executed it belonged to you, Victor. Only you. Gasps rippled through the room. Several engineers leaned forward, their faces pale. Adrian advanced the log one line further, and 1 minute later your account again. Manually purging the access records for that directory, a sloppy attempt to cover your tracks. You erased her work. You erased her proof. But you left behind your fingerprints in the command log. Victor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a drowning man. "I was securing the system," he blurted at last. "Protecting sensitive data. She's an outsider. A risk." Adrian cut him off with a raised hand, his gaze merciless. "The greatest risk to this company isn't outsiders, Victor. It's insiders with no integrity. You didn't just steal her discovery. You tried to erase the very truth itself. That is unforgivable." The engineers shifted uneasily, shame creeping across their faces. Some had mocked Leila. Some had dismissed her. None had defended her. Adrian turned his gaze to them, his voice resonant with conviction. "Let this be clear. The greatest threat to Nexus Dynamics is not a bug in our code. It's a bug in our culture. A culture that rewards arrogance, pedigree, and politics over raw talent. A culture that allowed this theft to happen in silence." He let the words hang in the charged air before delivering the final blow. "Victor Hale, you are fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your access is revoked. Your role terminated. You leave with nothing but your personal belongings." Victor's face had drained to a ghastly white. He stood slowly, his movements mechanical, the weight of ruin pressing down on him. No one met his eyes. No one offered a word of defense. His carefully crafted empire of reputation had crumbled in an instant dot as he reached the door. He stumbled slightly, bumping into a chair, a pathetic misstep that stripped the last shred of dignity from him. Then the glass door sealed behind him, cutting him off from the empire he had once believed he owned. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Adrian let it linger. Then he looked directly at the board, then at the weary engineers who remained. This company will change, starting today. Nexus Dynamics will be a place where brilliance is recognized no matter where it comes from. Degrees, titles, resumes they, mean nothing without results. From this moment forward, talent is the only currency that matters. The words rang like a verdict, a promise carved into the bedrock of the company's future. Later that afternoon, Adrian found Leila Morgan in his office. She stood by the vast window, the city sprawling beneath her like a restless ocean. The exhaustion of the past 3 days clung to her, but her eyes were clear. "It's done," Adrian said softly. She turned, her voice quiet. "He deleted everything. I thought it was gone." "He tried," Adrian corrected. "But you, of all people, should know good code always leaves a trace. So does the truth." Her lips trembled into a faint, uncertain smile. "I should have been more careful." "No." His tone was firm, almost fierce. "You should be able to do brilliant work without fearing it will be stolen. That is my responsibility, to build a place where you can." He paused, then stepped closer, his voice gentler. "The Gilded Spoon has a vacancy on their wait staff as of today. Coincidentally, Nexus Dynamics has a vacancy for a senior software architect." Leila blinked, her breath catching. "Senior architect? More than that," Adrian said. "I'm creating a new division effective immediately. The Systemic Integrity Group. It will report directly to me. Its mandate will be to challenge assumptions, test our systems, expose flaws before the world can. And it needs a leader who can see the whole picture, not just the lines of code." He extended his hand. "That leader is you, if you want it." Leila's mind reeled. Hours ago, she had been a waitress sneaking stolen minutes on an old laptop. Now she stood on the edge of a future she hadn't even dared to imagine. Her old doubts whispered. "I don't have a degree," she murmured, almost apologetically. Adrian smiled, a rare warmth softening the steel of his features. "You have something better. You have the solution when everyone else was lost. That's not something any university can teach." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Leila smiled, truly smiled, radiant and fierce. The fear finally stripped away. She reached out and took his hand. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do it." The waitress was gone. The imposter was gone. In her place stood the architect of a new era. In the days that followed, Nexus Dynamics transformed. News of Victor Hale's downfall spread quickly, whispered through cubicles, echoed in hushed conversations at coffee stations, dissected in industry blogs that thrive on scandal. The company had been spared collapse, but something far greater had shifted. Its culture had cracked open. For years, Nexus had been a fortress of prestige. Hiring committees valued resumes stamped with Ivy League crests. Interviews were rituals designed to filter for pedigree, and promotions were too often the rewards of politics rather than performance. But the revelation in that boardroom, the exposure of theft, the public recognition of an outsider's brilliance had ripped the mask away. Adrian Cross made good on his word. The Systemic Integrity Group was born, its purpose to question everything, to poke holes in assumptions before they hardened into disaster. And at its head, in an office she never dreamed she'd occupy, sat Leila Morgan. The first weeks were a blur. She wasn't greeted with open arms. Suspicion lingered, and whispers trailed behind her in hallways. To some, she was still the waitress, an anomaly that threatened the natural order. But the proof of her worth was undeniable. She had solved the problem no one else could, and with every meeting she led, every insight she offered, every quiet demonstration of her clarity, the doubt eroded. Adrian watched from a distance, his faith in her unshaken. He had seen something in her that night in the kitchen, not just skill, but resilience, the kind of strength that couldn't be taught, only forged through hardship. Leila had lived with setbacks, with doors closed to her, with brilliance that had nowhere to go but into the margins of her life. And when opportunity finally appeared, she seized it. Victor Hale had been brilliant, yes, but brilliance without integrity collapses under its own weight. His arrogance had blinded him. His hunger for recognition had led him to theft. In the end, he hadn't just failed the company, he had failed himself. Layla was the opposite. She hadn't chased glory. She had chased the truth. And that difference made her not only the rightful savior of Odyssey, but also the future of Nexus Dynamics. Months later, the Odyssey platform launched successfully. Its stability was heralded as groundbreaking, its efficiency reshaping global logistics exactly as Adrian had promised the world it would. The company's stock soared. Vidian Global signed an expanded contract. Competitors, who had circled like sharks, now swam nervously in the wake of a giant revitalized. But within the company, the true story was something quieter, more profound. Engineers who had once dismissed her began seeking Lila's insight. Junior staff, long overshadowed by louder voices, found courage in her presence. Her journey was a reminder that value wasn't conferred by diplomas or titles, but by contribution. And Adrian, though still the towering figure at the helm, spoke more often now of humility. In all-hands meetings, he reminded them of the lesson. Brilliance can come from anywhere. He told them about the culture that had nearly destroyed them, about the arrogance that had blinded them, and about the waitress who had saved them. In the quiet of her own thoughts, Lila often returned to that first night. The smell of garlic and grease in the kitchen, the flicker of code on her battered laptop. The moment Adrian Cross stepped into her hidden world and shattered the boundaries of her life. She thought of her mother, of the years she had spent shelving, her ambitions, coding in secret just to keep her skills alive. She thought of the night she had believed it was all for nothing, as she realized now it hadn't been wasted. Every line she had written, every concept she had tested in obscurity, had prepared her for that impossible moment that she was no longer an outsider peering through the glass. She was shaping the system itself. The story of Lila Morgan and Adrian Cross spread far beyond Nexus Dynamics to some. It was a tale of corporate intrigue, of betrayal and redemption to others. It was a parable about integrity, proof that a single act of courage could topple arrogance and reshape an empire. But to those who listened closely, it was something even more powerful, a reminder that genius hides in plain sight, that brilliance doesn't always announce itself with degrees or corner offices or accolades. Sometimes it is found in the hands of someone carrying plates through a restaurant or in the mind of someone the world has overlooked. Lila Morgan hadn't just solved a bug in a piece of software. She had exposed a flaw in an entire culture, and in doing so, she helped rebuild it stronger than before. And so her story stands as a beacon to every dreamer who believes their circumstances define their ceiling. Know that your potential is greater. To every leader who believes talent only comes from polished resumes, know that you may be overlooking and your greatest asset. To every company that prizes ego over integrity, know that arrogance is the truest virus and honesty the only cure. Adrian Cross and Lila Morgan proved that integrity is not just a virtue, it is the foundation of innovation itself. Without it, even the most brilliant empires will rot from within. With it, however, even the most unlikely hands could shape the future. If this story inspires you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A student doubting their worth, an employee overlooked in silence, a leader blind to hidden talent. Because the truth is simple, brilliance is everywhere. We only have to recognize it.